Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Display Line podcast. I am your host, Ollie,
And I'm your other host, Joey.
and today we are going to be talking through aviation events, news, and Takeoff Thursdays that happened in the last week or so. So,
Yeah,
Joey, do you want to get us started?
so there's been quite a lot of aviation news over the last week or two, and even just before that. But there's been a few funny moments, especially on ADSB Exchange. There was the JD Vance incident. That was quite amusing, actually. They did a
Yeah,
second one, and
they
they
did.
put
They added Charlie
Charlie
Kirk.
Kirk. That was something, to be fair.
And,
Yeah,
I believe the call sign was Vance 1 and Vance 2, I believe, on
Yeah, I
both
don't know.
days.
Was the second one not? I don't know what the second one was, but I know Vance one was the first one.
Yeah.
I
And
didn't actually see much on the second one.
so someone spoofing ADSB and drawing Charlie Kirk and JD Vance on ADSB, which is slightly humorous, in a way. Sort of depends on what your humor is. In other news, though, there has been quite a few incidents in aviation in over the last few weeks, including a very special aircraft known as the WB-57, owned by NASA, um, that had a landing gear failure. What airport was that at, like?
That was in Houston, I believe. That was a quite unfortunate crash. Obviously, being a one of one aircraft, 70 years old. You don't see many of them. And hopefully it's recoverable. Probably not. It did land on the test belly. I don't know what they call it. There's obviously equipment lost, I assume. Hopefully we see it flying again.
You're quite knowledgeable about space and NASA, so why don't you talk us through the sort of other aircraft that NASA have?
Yeah, they got a few F-18s that they use for testing. They've got obviously the WB-57, which they use for aerial footage for rocket landings and rocket launches. They have a few bigger aircraft. I'm not quite sure what they have. I'll have to Google it. But I know that they have quite the fleet of aircraft, but they have nothing like the WB-57.
Now, I believe the WB-57 was based off the Canberra made by the British. I may be wrong there, but I believe it was
I
a
think
sort of
so. It did look
prototype
very
version.
similar. Yeah, it looked very similar, so I would assume so.
Also, NASA are going to space again soon, and again, you are the most knowledgeable person on this. If you want to talk us through the Artemis 2 mission coming up, that would be awesome.
It just came to news while editing that the Artemis 2 launch has now been delayed until at least March 6th due to a hydrogen leak that was discovered during the wet rehearsal. So they won't be covering the Artemis launch because they can't really.
Yeah, okay.
So, I believe that in other aviation news, in airline actual news, Aer Lingus has to cease operations out of Manchester due to financial issues. I've seen this reported on a few channels on TikTok, YouTube, and various other sources. And
Yeah.
obviously, as they're based at Manchester, they don't actually have the best, compared to their base in Dublin, they don't have very good financial stability. It's not as well flown out of for them as their base in Dublin, which now that's going to affect. I think it was about 300 flight crew, and obviously tens of thousands of jobs, sort of within the company that are based out of Manchester. So hopefully they can sort that out. But Virgin Atlantic are stepping in replacement until Manchester can find another replacement for Aer Lingus. So that's amazing news, actually, that still people who need to get out to places like Florida can still get there safely. And yeah,
Yeah, I hadn't actually heard about this until you just brought that up. But that sounds like a problem that's going to need real time and effort to be resolved.
which is good that Virgin is stepping in to help
Yeah,
Manchester in this sort of time where
yeah,
they don't have the same flights and a lot of flights will be cancelled. I assume that Aer Lingus may have already booked, so that could be even worse financially for both the airport and the airline itself.
yeah. That's going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on over the next few weeks, maybe even few months.
Obviously, this is not really new news in the such that airlines are ceasing operations or out of bases or ceasing operations entirely. I think it was what was it, Eastern Airways that ceased operations a few weeks back. It was some aviation airline that flew ATR 72s from I think somewhere around the south coast to Jersey and Guernsey and places like that, like short short haul flights.
Yeah, it seems like it's happening quite a lot recently, especially in the last 10 years, sort of thing. It's becoming a very competitive market.
Yeah, and things like British Airways and American Airlines are always going to be much higher over things like EasyJet, which are obviously probably not doing that well financially, considering things like Spirit Airlines and other budget airlines are just completely going out now. Um,
Yeah.
and they're sort of lucky to be funded by the government, really. Otherwise, I think some of these short haul budget airlines are going to be going out of service within the
Yeah.
next 20, 30 years.
I think Ryanair will probably be one of the last ones holding on. There was actually quite a funny moment with them recently with Elon Musk. He offered to buy the airline and they did a sale online called, I think it was the Idiot Sale or something like that. That was quite fun. But he then offered to put Starlink terminals on all the Ryanair planes, and the CEO was explaining how that would decrease fuel efficiency by 2%, which would cost £250 million a year annually. So they're really, really focusing on lowering costs, and I
Yeah.
think they'll last for a while.
I believe quite a few years ago now, I think it was. I don't know if he was joking or not, but he said they'd take out the entire back part and make a standing cabin that's essentially free, really, or
Yeah, I think
very,
he was
very
being
low
serious.
cost.
I think his plan is to just make people spend money on everything except the seats. Because
Yeah,
if you buy a free plane ticket and then buy a lottery ticket for 50 quid on there, you paid 50 quid for that flight.
yeah, exactly. And I think he's
Yeah,
charging, I think, 2 quid or 5 quid to use the toilets on the flights, something like that. Which means fair enough, you
yeah,
get a free ticket, It's £5,
yeah. I
really
think
not that bad.
you can really find some cheap flights with Ryanair. I think, like, if you look far enough ahead, get some snakes, get some sails, not snails. You can get some for like as cheap as 20 quid, which is impressive
And
because
obviously
it's
they
not an
use 737s, I believe 800 to max. Obviously 737s. I can't remember if they just use max now, but I know they have used, lower variants such as the 800 900 previously in operation history. Um,
yeah,
but considering that other, 737s had loads of issues in early of last year and sort of a whole way through the last year, I don't believe Ryanair has ever had a crash or not, a serious aviation incident from what I remember.
yeah. I think they're one of the last ones still going with basically no major incidents. They of course have, you know, some minor issues having to do emergency landings and stuff, but I don't think they've ever had a crash with a loss of life. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they've had no major incidents.
I mean, yeah, they probably had. Obviously, they have quite a few hard landings, which people make jokes about. But with that aircraft, it's completely normal. But some of the hard landings have caused things like hydraulic issues and gear issues and sort of structural integrity issues. But other than that, they've not really had any incident at all. I don't think I've ever seen a Ryanair crash on the news at any point.
Yeah, I don't think I have either. I think it's hopefully it doesn't happen, but I think they're one of the last ones to not have it happen. So yeah, I think there's a lot of speaking of accidents, there was a few crashes in around the world in the last few weeks as well. There's one in Colombia.
There
I
was,
think
yeah.
no survivors in that one.
I believe, yeah, it was 15 or 16 people on board. No one survived, unfortunately.
Yeah,
And among that was Colombian ambassador. I know he died. I saw that on the news while I was scrolling through, sort of researching this incident. One of the Colombian ambassadors died on this plane
yeah.
crash. Now,
No
I believe,
reports on everything though, is there? So we don't know what
yeah,
caused it.
that's what I was about to say. I was about to say now I believe that we don't know the cause of this crash yet. And
Yeah.
obviously, with various crashes being reported on in the last year or so, it's going to take a while for some of these major incidents to come out with an incident report.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll probably talk about it when we do see it, but as of right now, we have no information besides knowing of the crash.
Which is a shame, really. We don't really want any fatalities in aviation. Fatalities meaning death and everything. If you die, it's pretty fatal.
Yeah, it is pretty fatal. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to see the investigation because it really was in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there's no videos of it going down. There's no videos of anything before that. There is just the video of the investigators at the crash site.
Yeah, and obviously people were tracking it. Well, they tracked it after the event, and they saw that it just disappeared off all flight radars and things like that. ADSB, it disappeared off that. It disappeared off Flight Radar 24, Plane Finder, all these different apps. It just vanished out of nowhere. And obviously, sometimes this can just happen. Sometimes you can have a what is it, a responder issue, a transponder issue,
Yeah,
sorry, which just
yeah.
breaks it. Or sometimes when you're in hilly, mountainous terrain, sometimes that can disrupt some of the signal. Um,
But it could have been also in a jamming area with obviously the military action, stuff like that. You get jamming areas, and that could also affect some of the equipment on the plane, which could lead
Especially
to an
with the
incident.
recent Venezuelan events, obviously Colombia borders Venezuela, so some of these electronical signals, obviously, if were the case, it could have jammed the transponder, but unfortunately, that doesn't look like the case.
Yeah, it looks. I will be interested to see the report on this one, and I will go through it at some point whenever it does happen. But this is not the kind of thing we want to see in aviation and stuff.
Now, Joey, in other military aviation news, I know we were just talking about the military. The Royal Navy has come out with their new Proteus helicopter, which I believe is the first ever unmanned helicopter. Now we have obviously unmanned drones, and obviously RC planes, which are unmanned planes. But I believe this is the first sort of massive project
Yeah, I think is it the first in
containing.
the world? It might
I
be.
think so. I believe I have not
Also,
seen any.
at what point does it go from drone to helicopter?
Probably the fact that it looks like a helicopter.
Yeah, that's fair.
I
But
don't really
like
know what to say to that. At
a
what point does it go?
helicopter is just a big drone, right?
I mean, I guess you
Like,
can say that, but I think it's more the
it
fact
is.
that a drone is sort of one of those things that you'd see in places like Ukraine.
Yeah, I suppose. But this is definitely a helicopter. It looks quite helicopter-like.
Yeah, obviously, hopefully this can go somewhere, and in the future we can get unmanned helicopters flying around everywhere. And I
Yeah, that would be
assume it
cool.
would probably be obviously a lot safer option, considering the fact that there won't be people in the helicopter. So even if it crashes, gets shot down in future combat, then there will be no loss of life other than the helicopter itself. And obviously, it's just like I said, a much safer alternative if you're on the attack or defense, considering the fact you can remotely launch all your weapons instead of having to get really close up to the target in person and shoot them that
Yeah.
way.
I mean, this is still very much an early development, though, right? I think it's only done one test flight so far, so it's
Something
still
like that.
very much a work in progress. But hopefully, we see a few more tests coming out over the next few months. That'll be
Yeah.
very cool to see. But not all helicopters are pilotless. Of course, we still got all of the other helicopters. We got attack helicopters, which were used recently to chase Russian ships out of some
Yeah.
UK waters that they were not supposed to be in.
I believe they
I
used
don't have much.
Wildcat attack helicopters from
Yeah,
Scotland, I think it was. I think it was one of the bases in Scotland that they had to launch them from because there's a Russian ship lurking around, like, what is it, pipelines and stuff, like Wi-Fi cables and
yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah. Obviously, we don't like doing that. We don't like having to do that, but we can't have them near any key communication cables because that's quite the national security risk, and we will chase them out if we have to. But I don't have much information on that. Obviously, they don't tell us everything that they have on that. We don't get pictures, at least from what
Yeah.
I've seen. But I believe they do this quite a lot.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, they're always Russian ships loitering around our cables, probably just monitoring them, seeing where they are, how to destroy them if they need to. And they've been doing it in the Baltic Sea for the past few decades now. So
Yeah, they're getting a lot closer nowadays, though. I believe that's why we have to chase them out with helicopters instead of getting the navy.
although in lighter military news, speaking of military, obviously the Red Arrows are in their winter training season. Now,
Yeah,
obviously, me and Joey, massive fans of the Red Arrows. We fly for a virtual Red Arrows team, as weird as that may sound. So, Joey, do you want to talk us through how winter training works?
yeah. So after the display season is over at the end of the year or near the end of the year, they will have a break, and then they will find new pilots during that break. And then over the course of the winter, they will train these new pilots. They will master the new maneuvers and formations. I believe they introduce one jet at a time, so they will
Yeah,
get Red 1 and Red 2, then Red 3 and 4, or 3, and then 4.
and four,
And they will
yeah.
just introduce them one by one and get them used to the formations is the safest. It's the most effective way they can. I believe winter training ends soon
It
as
will
of
end
as
soon,
of
yeah.
time of
It's the
recording
display
this. Yeah,
season. The display season's coming up pretty soon. I think the first air shows around April, May time. So they'll be
Yeah,
going over
something.
to Greece, is it, to finish their winter training? That's what they usually do. They usually head over to
Yeah.
Greece to do about a week there.
Something unique though about winter training is they do not use any colours. When they're
Yeah,
using the
they only
smoke,
use
they
white.
use
Yeah,
strictly white smoke, which I find quite interesting because it makes me wonder why they do that. I'm sure I could probably Google this, but I am quite intrigued to find out why they use white smoke. I suppose it makes it a bit easier for the new pilots. But I suppose you'd want them to remember the smoke colours. So
remember
I
the
suppose,
smoke colours that they'd be using,
yeah,
obviously. But
yeah. So I'm sure we'll find out at some point. I might Google it after this, but it is intriguing that they use explicitly white smoke.
So, moving on to part two of our podcast this week, and the title Blackpool Airshow. Now, Joey lives near Blackpool, and he's been
Yeah,
going since I believe 2013 was at least the first year he remembers going. And we'll put a
yeah,
picture up on the screen now.
yeah. That
Obviously, for
picture was
those
taken
watching
in
on YouTube,
2013.
for those watching on YouTube, you can have a look at that. But Joey, do you want to talk us through some nice fun facts about Blackpool Airshow?
Yeah, it was actually, fun fact, the first air show to ever happen in the UK officially. It was 6 years after the first ever powered flight. Wright brothers, of course, we all know 'em. But I think this was 1909, which was like pretty early on, and they did quite a few special flights at that time. They did the slowest to complete a circuit, which I think was like an hour and a half. It was like 20 miles an hour. Pretty mental. Then of course you got the newer stuff like the Red Arrows always go, the Typhoon always goes. You've always got gyros. You've always got the wing walkers. Those are always fun to get pictures of. Obviously you see them doing maneuvers on top of the planes. The Red Arrows actually, I believe I remember a few of them saying it's one of their favorites. I think it might have
Yeah,
been Red 10 commentating saying it's some of their favorites just because I think they get a lot of freedom. There's not anything going on to the sides. There's a giant tower in the center, so they know where to look. I think because they've been going there the longest, I think, since it's the oldest, I think they're quite familiar with the place, and
yeah.
I think it's just one of the better places to do an air show.
And obviously, they have not, like you said, not that many restrictions. They don't really have a height limit, like restriction. They're quite far away from the crowd, so they can go a bit lower and they can go a bit faster and things like that. So yeah, obviously, it's always a favourite for the Reds to do, as we were just talking about the Red Arrows, but also the Typhoon as well. The Typhoon always goes to Blackpool Airshow. Obviously, me and you went last year. And Joey, you go to Blackpool Airshow every year mainly. So talk us through some of your favourites that you've seen throughout the years.
Yeah, so I think my personal favorite obviously has to be the Reds or the Typhoon, just because they are the main displays of the show. But that's not to look down on any of the other displays. There's obviously the Jet Pits display, Richard
Yep,
Goodwin.
Rich
That's
Goodwin.
an incredible display. One of my favorites. It's actually my dad's favorite. You've got the Wing Walkers. They make a regular appearance. They are pretty cool to see. You got the Gyro. The auto gyro, that's a pretty cool one. You got the Strike Masters, those are easily in the top five for me. I don't know if they go every year, but they did go last year, and I'm hoping to see them again this year. I'm trying to think what else do we get. We get the Catalina. That's a good one to see. It's a unique aircraft. Obviously a Miss Pickup, I believe, is the one
Miss
that
Pickup,
typically
yeah.
goes. But yeah, there's just a great array of aircrafts, a lot of different ones. You also get the few unique ones every year that you didn't see last year, but the
Yeah.
main ones are always there.
And this show usually takes place around mid to late August. I believe I'm correct in saying that.
Yeah, it's usually, I think, 18th and 19th of August this year. It's always the middle weekend in
Yeah.
August, roundabouts that area. And then there's, of course, a month or two after, there is Southport Airshow, which is very close. Hoping to see the Reds there this year. I know they didn't make it last year. And the weather was horrible last year as well. It really was not fortunate for them. Nothing on Southport Airshow organisers. It was just very bad luck at the time. But hopefully we get a better Southport Airshow this year.
And we were talking about this the other day, actually. So the first ever air show in 1909, I believe that was the first one ever in Britain for us.
Yeah.
But we were talking about, and I believe you said the first ever flight was there. I think there was only one aircraft, and you said it was about 3 hours long or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the only flight, but I think it was one of the main ones. I think it was the only one on one of the days because it was actually a week-long event. I think it was called like Blackpool Flight Week or something like that. but it was one of the days had just one aircraft going around circuits at 20 miles an hour for an hour and a half. I feel like that would get pretty boring after a while, but I suppose when aircraft are a very new thing, it's probably pretty exciting to see something literally flying in the air.
And it went at about 48 miles per hour or something, or 28 miles per hour. It was something very, very slow. So it was flying around for that amount of time, and it only went about 47 miles, I believe, is what you said.
Yeah, around just shy of 50 miles in an hour and a half. Obviously we've come a long way since then. We're getting aircraft that are going basically near the speed of sound at air shows. They can't go any faster than that, of course, because of the rule, which I think was last year increased to max 0.95.
Yes,
Yeah.
I know it's been that in the USA. No, the USA is 0.98, but I believe in the UK it did get up to about 0.95.
Yeah.
But the reason why they can't go over Mach 1 is because they would probably kill a few spectators, if not make the entire crowd deaf with the sonic boom.
Yeah, it would definitely shatter some car windows, that's for sure.
It may be a few dead people. It's very
Yeah,
fatal. Might be
yeah,
very
the
lethal.
dead people might have experienced a fatal amount of death, to be honest.
And Blackpool itself is a beautiful, beautiful beach. I've been there, been up the tower as well. And obviously, you were talking about it earlier about how the Reds have a centre point, you know, how they can fly over the top of it and then base everything they're doing on the centre of the tower. Sort of talk us through what the pilot should be thinking in that sort of scenario there.
Yeah, obviously a lot of this is on Red 1 and Red 6, the leader of the team and the leader of the back four, which is called Hannah. They obviously, when they're doing breaks and stuff, they are flying straight towards the crowd, and the aiming point is what we call center point. And for Blackpool Airshow, it's a very obvious center point, which makes it easier for the pilots. It makes it easier for even the commentator to know when to start saying certain things because they know when they're about to roll out. But it is a lot easier for them at Blackpool Airshow because they have a very obvious defined center point, and obviously they fly over it at the start as well. It's a difficult one to do that though because it's underneath the aircraft, but they get it right every time.
So the main focus is Blackpool, but we have other things that we do need to move on to. So now we've got section 2 out of the way. We move on to section 3 after that incredibly exciting part 1 and 2, where we said about
Mm.
aviation news and then Blackpool. But part 3, probably the most exciting part, is Takeoff Thursdays. Now we just won't be
Yeah.
doing RIAT. We will be doing other things such as Hampshire Airshow, Midlands Air Festival, and any others that you, as the viewer, may want us to do, like we mentioned last week in other air shows. So, Joey, do you want to take us through some of your favourites so far? So, Joey, would you like to take us through some of your favourite announcements so far from the air shows that we've seen?
Yeah, so there's been announcements from a few air shows, not too many yet, as it's still pretty early on in the year, but Hampshire Air Show have announced a few, including Jet Pits, which is always a crowd favourite, at least one of my personal favourites. They've got the Yaks, I think it's the Yak Trios they've announced. They got the Spitfire, which is always a personal favourite of mine. It's an incredible aircraft to see displaying. And the Great Wall Display Team, I believe.
Yeah, so
I think that's it so
obviously
far.
we've got Rich Goodwin in the Pit Special, which is a very, very special aircraft actually, as it has jet engines attached to the side of it, which makes it, I
Yeah.
think, the only unique Pit Special in the world that has jet engines, and in fact maybe the only biplane ever fitted with jet engine used in a display circuit. Now,
Yeah,
it was
it's
built
fun.
over 4 years, according to Rich Goodwin himself, and it's based off the S2S Pitts fuselage, just obviously modified with jet engines that have been that were tried on G-Wiz, which is his normal pit special, the red and blue liveried one. And I believe its maximum speed is somewhere about 156 mile an hour or 251 kilometers an hour for the
Yeah,
Americans.
that is without the jet engines, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if we have a top speed of it with the jet engines. I don't know if that's been tested. At least I couldn't find it when I was looking. Maybe they could test that at some point and give us the information. That would be quite cool to know the top speed of it, just to see how much performance those jet engines really are putting in.
And they've got the Great Wall Display Team as well, which are the
Yeah,
biplanes and triplanes from the First World War and sort of just after. We also have the Yak 3, which is always a fan favourite. We always love to see that at air shows. I've seen that quite a few air shows before. Always a thrilling display, throwing a Soviet era aircraft around. And the Spitfire Mark 9. So, Joey, would you like to talk us through some facts about the Spitfires?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting aircraft in terms of history because obviously World War Two, we had the Battle of Britain, which I believe it had a few hundred kills, confirmed kills in the Battle of Britain. Obviously, not the highest amount of kills in the Battle of Britain on the Allies side. There was the Hurricane, which had more, but people talk about the Spitfire a lot more because I think people just prefer the Spitfire. It sounds
Yeah.
cooler in a lot of people's opinions. Obviously, at some air shows, you can buy bullets from the Spitfire on the ground, which I have one of. I believe Ollie has one of.
I have, I
Um,
think, one or two of in my display cabinet, so
yeah, I think they're like a few quid. If you have a few quid and you're at an air show and you see it, it's definitely well worth buying. Um, because it's just such a unique aircraft, and over time we might see less and less of them flying because they're getting pretty old nowadays. But hopefully they fly for a lot longer than
yeah.
everyone's expecting.
So other air shows like Midlands, they've announced things like the Extra 300 from the Global All Stars team, based at Little Granston. So that's always fun seeing that being thrown around, usually with a night display as well on the Friday night fire. And they've also announced some very special helicopters, the Whirlwind and the Sea King, which were RAF helicopters used in search and rescue missions, sort of back in the late 1900s and early 2000s, back in the RAF's prime, I'd say, when they had the best looking air force. Obviously, we don't have that many type variety of aircrafts now. We only have the Typhoon and F-35 as our main fighters, with things like the Hawks as our trainers. But back in the day, we had so many aircraft. The Tornado, always such an iconic aircraft. The Hercules, a fan favorite as well. Unfortunately, only in service with places like the US and some places in the Middle East as well.
Yeah, it's hopefully we can over time get a few more aircraft. I know we're working on the Tempest right now. Hopefully we can get that up and running in the next couple years. Just to give us a bit more variety. I feel like we need a bit more variety right now.
Yeah, because the air show circuit is sort of shrinking as well, and with less aircraft being made, that means less aircraft to be shown off to the public. Things like the air tattoo in 1980s, there was hundreds and thousands and millions of variety of planes. You having
Mm.
things from like the Russian Air Force as well, like the
Yeah,
bomber that they have, the Tu-95, and flankers as well from the Ukrainian Air Force, and these things are probably never coming back to places like Riyadh or ever the display circuit as a whole.
yeah. Hopefully we see a few more Ukrainian aircraft once that situation is dealt with. Those were really crowd favorites during Riyadh. You got the MiGs; those are always fun for people to see. I personally have never seen any. Hope to see some one day. But I feel like we have to wait for that at the minute.
So the hopes for Midlands, personally for me at least, is always the BBMF. I know the Lancaster isn't displaying this year; that's gone into maintenance. But they still have plenty of other aircraft, such as Hurricane Spitfires and the Dakota, which they recently repainted into sort of a camo scheme rather than D-Day Battle of Britain type
Yeah,
scheme.
yeah. I
Um,
personally don't go to Midlands, but I know a few people who do, and I know they're hoping for Team Raven. I think it's just a crowd favorite overall.
And I know a few pilots from Team Raven. As mentioned last week, I know people like Bruce Buglas. He's in Team Raven. Recently joined this year, I believe, after he restored an old RV6 at his aerodrome in Shropshire. And the Red Arrows, obviously, always a fan favourite. You got to have the Red Arrows at Midlands. Why couldn't you have the Red Arrows at Midlands? It's always
Yeah,
beautiful sunny skies where the Red Arrows are showing, and it's always the Britain blue for the Red Arrows.
yeah.
Now, Joey, do you have any hopes for Riyadh? Obviously, by the time this video goes out, the first takeoff Thursday would have happened. We're currently recording on a Sunday, but we would edit in a part with this week's takeoff Thursday. So, Joey, what do you think is going to come up on this first week?
It's hard to tell for specific weeks, but I can tell you I'm hoping, as I said last week, for Solo Turk. Just because we didn't see them last year and I've never seen them personally. Hoping for Solo Turk, maybe a few unique aircraft we haven't seen before. That would be quite nice.
Things like the MiG-29, again from I think it was like Slovakia or some place like that, that still operate them. That was always, I believe, a one-off event. You see them in America sometimes at places like EAA and stuff like that. but never really in the UK, which is why Riyadh is probably the best air shows. You get they invite up to like 150 countries or something to come, and obviously they bring their unique aircraft. Like Egypt last year, they brought some very unique aircraft.
Yeah, I saw that one. It was quite something to see that aircraft. I didn't see it fly. But obviously people who were there for arrivals will have seen it fly, and it will have been something special to see that fly.
So wrapping this up, part 4, the last part of this podcast. We'll be just going through what we've just done in the podcast. So, Joey, do you want to take us through some of the news events that we've just discussed?
Yeah, so obviously we talked about the crash that happened. We talked about announcements for air shows like Hampshire and the Midlands. And then we discussed some about NASA, which we're classing as aviation news because Artemis is technically aviation, I believe, at least for a short
Aerospace, isn't
period.
it? So it's sort of a
Yeah,
mix between aviation and space. So obviously we thought we'd
yeah.
include it, as it's also very
And then,
interesting, a huge day for the aerospace industry, as we're going
yeah,
back to the moon, or at least around the moon for the first time in many, many years.
yeah, I'm sure when we do our first one after the Artemis 2 mission, we'll have a lot to talk about, a lot of pictures for anyone watching on YouTube. And then obviously we discussed the WB-57 crash, which luckily everyone was safe, but it's
Yeah.
definitely unfortunate. And if we get any updates on that as to whether it will fly again, we'll let you know.
So, in very, very special announcement, there is a few new guests that we may, though it's not confirmed yet, but we're in talks with getting on our podcast, and these consist of people like Rich Goodwin, which we discussed earlier with the Pit Special, the GJ Pit, as it's also known, and people like Ted Coningsby. I actually got a message from earlier on today, as of this recording. And he said that we might be able to make something work, but obviously he's very busy with the upcoming display season. And last of all, Richard Ward from the Stamp Formation team. So hopefully we're in sort of mid-discussion with them, and hoping to get some of them on the podcast in upcoming time.
Yeah, that would be quite good to get guests because right now it's just us two talking to each other, and we can only know so much about a display team or aviation, but people who have been in this space their entire lives, people who involve themselves with it much more than we do, of course, they'll know a lot more than we do, and we can
Yeah,
ask them some good questions.
exactly. So hopefully we can get some of them and expand our knowledge base and you, the viewers or listeners' knowledge base at home.
Yeah,
So, if there are any air shows, announcements, or any news that you would like us to cover, please let us know on the Instagram or on any of the socials that you may come across. We do have a link tree on the Instagram to all of our socials, including things like YouTube, Spotify, and even Instagram, just in case you got lost when you went onto the link tree. But yeah, so shout outs to obviously me and Joey just for being the host, and our editor for this week, Dan. Um, he's really helping us out this week to try and get some better audio quality and some just better overall podcast. So thank you to him, and well, we'll see you next week.